Now, despite what people say, Season 2 has a lot to offer. You got Thetis, who's voiced by Optimus Prime, the introduction of Angstrom Levy, which sets up what's going on in Season 3 right now, and even this wild mummy who we still know nothing about.
Wait, you're both female?
Huh? And?
But just like Season 1, Season 2 also deviates from the comics in a number of ways. And a lot of the timelines and character arcs change as well, either for the better or for worse. So to see what those changes are, let's break down every difference using a difference counter to see whether these changes helped or hurt the show and how Season 2 sets the stage for Season 3. If you enjoy the video, leave a like, subscribe if you're new, and let's get to it. Episode 1. Now, even though it doesn't start off this way, it adapts everything from issues 14, 16, 17, and 24. And right off the bat, it starts off different with a wild fight between Mark and Immortal, with him trying to prevent Mark and Omni-Man from finding the Resistance and their secret base. Until Omni-Man flies in and the two proceed to kill him. Then it's revealed that this is an alternate universe, a post-apocalyptic future where Mark ends up siding with his father. And we see it all through the eyes of Angstrom Levi. Which, by the way, I'm gonna call him Levi just because of Attack on Titan, don't kill me. The comic just straight up starts off with the Monitor. On the Monitor, Mark is a lot more domineering and cutthroat in the comics compared to his more empathetic tone here.
We know. You all feel like we're the bad guys because my dad and I took over your planet. But you're going to be part of the Viltrum Empire now.
Levi gets to the secret lair through a cardboard box elevator, while here the elevator is on the bus. When he goes down there, he's greeted by Robot and Immortal, who does not like Levi at all, by the way. He thinks he's useless because he couldn't get his hands on a part that they need to track down Mark and Nolan. While in the show, he's greeted by an older Adam Eve and Robot, who's sporting two bodies here instead of one. And Levi actually came back with a way to hurt the Viltrumites, until they both bust in both mediums. And while the show gives some dialogue between Mark and Eve, and he chooses not to kill her, they just immediately start killing everybody in the comic. They didn't waste any time. Robot's main body also perished here, and Levi gets saved at the last minute. Afterwards, it cuts to our Mark going around saving as many people as possible, but you can see that he's just a shell of what he once was. All he can think about is what happened between him and his father, especially when he sees old villains. None of this happened in the comic. Afterwards, it shows not only the Graysons, but the entire city rebuilding after what happened in the Season 1 finale. And in the comics, it has bits and pieces of this, but it largely just moves on pretty quickly after all that. But before we continue, do you love rare comics?
Maybe.
Do you want to start collecting figurines and vintage collectibles? Then look no further to the sponsor of this video, Encore. It's like if TikTok combined with an online auction. Real sellers show you what they're selling, and many actually share stories or knowledge about the comics for sale, so you can learn while you shop. There's a ton of fixed listings in the buy now section, and if you're looking to negotiate, you can always send the seller an offer. But I'd say one of the best parts about this app is its auctions. And I'm not the only one who thinks this, they seem to be really popular on here. Let me show you real quick. You just swipe to bid, or you can set your max bid and the system bids up automatically. Make sure you save your auctions if you want to get notified when there's 5 minutes left. And another thing that I love about this is that since the sellers are required to show you videos of what they're selling, this just increases the trust within the app. Not only that, but all sellers are ID verified. And the Encore guarantee protects you if your item comes in not as described. There's a ton of giveaways in the app that are completely free to enter, and Encore themselves even pay for giveaway shipping. So if you win, you don't pay anything. I'm telling you, man, this is a great app. And I'm not gonna try to sell something that I don't do myself. So I already got a rare comic from here and I love it. I'm gonna keep getting them. Use my link down below, or you can use this QR code as well to download the app on iOS and Android app stores today. But okay, let's get back to the video. The Marley twins break out of prison with the help of Levi, but here they share a cell, while in the show, the prison keeps them separate. Here, the twins also figure out how Levi's powers work and is on board with Angstrom's plan without any resistance, really. While in the show, they yap till it's no tomorrow about their hatred for working with others. Afterwards, Mark gets back to school and everybody feels bad for him. Even the bully who hugs him and calls his dad Jack.
He was like Jack, right?
He's also talked to Amber about how he blames himself for everything that's happened, and how he should be out there being a hero than in school. But in the comic, when he comes back, he largely goes unnoticed. Only a few people welcomed him. But this is also when comic William, bro, it's like, oh yeah, man, yo, me and Eve were totally a couple. And I've got you and your dad to thank for it. Mark gets pissed, understandably so. What best friend says that to their friend whose father did all that and left? But I digress, you know, Amber is also different too. Here she's honestly a good, understanding girlfriend towards Mark, while in the comics she just isn't even given the chance to comfort him because he always blows her off. This dialogue between Mark and Cecil is new. They talk about how Mark feels like he's ready, but Cecil knows that he's not. The Guardians of the Globe then take forever to defeat this villain, and this is the moment Cecil fully realizes how inadequate the new Guardians is. And afterwards brings Bulletproof in and Immortal to lead the team from here on. And now there's a lot of changes here. For one, in the comic, this realization from Cecil happened when they took a long time to defeat the Flaxons, even with the help of Adam, Eve, and Invincible, saying that the previous Guardians would have done it in half the time. Also, this was the first appearance of this guy, who is one of my favorite villains, by the way.
I'm the Giant, and I want to be president of America.
But yeah, his debut came all the way in issue 42, and he was brought down by both Invincible and the Guardians, including Immortal. And it happened right before Omni-Kid got his powers. Which, as y'all know, is different because Omni-Kid doesn't get his powers until season 3. But by this time, we've already seen this red thing twice now in the show. Here, Robot learned what fear was for the first time during this fight, since he wasn't even close to having a human body in the comic at this time. Cecil is also way more harsh in the show, and he instantly makes Immortal the new leader, while in the comic, Immortal only started as a consultant. Olga shows up and makes Debbie food, and Angstrom gets to the lab with the twins and they just pop up there, just a jump cut. While in the comic, it actually shows them getting into Levi's van and driving to his lab. It was pretty weird, to be honest. And they talk about his ultimate plan and what he needs the twins to build. But the show makes Angstrom appear a lot more heroic and selfless than in the comic, who literally just goes to dimensions where it's only women and he doesn't come back until later. The twins also didn't need their own dimension to work hard for Levi because they thought the knowledge they gained here will help them with their own future plans. Eve and Mark have a much deeper conversation than he did with Amber. And now that I think about it, it's always been like that, even in the comics. And we see that the main problem Mark is having is that he just does not want to be like his father. That's what he talks to everyone about. The show makes this one of Mark's biggest struggles this season, while the comic doesn't do it nearly as much, if at all really, because like I said in the previous video, Mark really does just handle everything on his own. I don't want to say he's more mature, but he's just a lot more relaxed about it all. And I think it's just because he's experienced more than Mark does in the show. Basically, Mark's demeanor and how he acts in season 3 right now is pretty much how he acts throughout the entire comic, or at least right after the big fight with Nolan. Afterwards, Mark finally goes back and decides to fully work for Cecil and goes on his first mission to stop Angstrom from commencing his plans. And they do the same thing in the comic, but it was far from his first mission there, since as you all know in my previous video, Mark decides to work with Cecil literally right after his big fight with Nolan in the comic, while here he doesn't do it until now. The fight goes the exact same, honestly, between the comic and the show, with the only difference being that Mark is a lot more broken up about everyone dying. Afterwards, Mark goes to see Amber and learns that they both got accepted into the same college. Then while going home, that's when Immortal shows up right after the fight with Levi, which is different because he shows up before they fought Levi and the twins. And lastly, Angstrom is the one that becomes the villain in this universe for both mediums. Episode 2 pulls from issues 15, 17,
21,
and 25. And it starts with 3 characters discussing Mark missing graduation due to being a hero. In the comic, no one but William knows the secret by this time. During graduation, Mark fights Doc Seismic in the show, but in the comic, he deals with a man seeking immortality after accidentally giving it to his wife, alongside a hero named Bolt. This was all cut. He also has a black eye at graduation here. The post-graduation party at Eve's house is new, and her construction work is also new too, but let me know if I'm wrong or not. I just don't remember this in the comic. Shapesmith's interactions with NASA's boss, or whatever he's called, is a lot funnier in the show too. He's given a leave of absence instead of being fired immediately, like in the comic. but both times he thinks that the boss is just gonna kill him. But the show just takes it an extra step, and it's pretty funny.
I don't know how else to say this.
Please don't kill me!
Christ on a Christmas tree!
The training sequence is new, but it's here to mainly show Immortal's new drill sergeant kind of leading when it comes to how he treats the team. Rex also finds out that he's sleeping with Kate, and that he's being cheated on. Even though Kate says that they weren't actually dating, but you know, he still thought they were. Still though, he found out the same way Eve did in both mediums, and I really like how they did that. So they're both giving him what he deserves in order for him to become a better person, but they're just doing it in slightly different ways. Rex also takes longer to change here than in the comic, since we don't see his true heroism shine until after he gets cheated on. Shapesmith's chilling at home, which happens in the comic too, but here it's revealed that he did actually end up getting fired, but in both mediums, after seeing Martian Man, he decides he wants to be a hero. Cecil tells Mark to go see about the new Darkwing. In the comic, he's there for hours looking for him, while here he finds him relatively quickly. They also talk about this perpetual night situation more in the show too. And also they talk exclusively about how he's Omni-Man's son, which means Mark is a bad man too. But when he tries to trap Mark in the Shadowverse, they go one step further with this, and Mark uses this status as Nolan's son to intimidate Darkwing into making them leave. Versus here when they just left because he wouldn't let him go, and that's it. Debbie seeing Cecil about Mark working with him is different, but it also sets up Donald's reveal that he's not the real Donald later down the line, which I think was a good change. Everything with Eve here is new, and everything with Amber is new as well when he takes her to Las Vegas, because they really don't do that in the comic. The only dates they have are when they go to the movies or at one of their houses. It's very rare when they do anything else together, really. Shapesmith then makes his debut, but it's vastly different. In the comic, he fights the Lizard League at night, and he does it while doing the Joy Boy pose. He shapeshifts into different characters, and then he leaves. While in the show, the Guardians catch him mid-fight and distrust him right from the start, and brings him into HQ for further questioning. They also changed the Fishman arc a lot. The show removes the tradition of Omni-Man's heir marrying the queen, and instead has Mark fight a huge monster, and he has to win in order for their forgiveness. In the comic though, he actually has to marry this woman, but he can only do so if he proves his strength by defeating this big sea creature. He also has to wear a dress for the ceremony, and he has to get it on with this woman in front of everyone in the stadium. But what ended up happening is that one of his soldiers wants her so bad that him and Mark comes up with a plan to have the soldier save the queen at the last minute, and it worked. Then they just begin doing the do with everybody in the stadium cheering them on.
Wow, what a great audience.
And when Shapesmith gets questioned at HQ, he lies about his true origin, which didn't happen yet in the comic. Plus here, they invite him to join after seeing how strong he is. But in the show, he acts the Guardians. King Lizard killing Supreme Lizard happens in both mediums, but then that's when we see a new scene that shows Angstrom learning how to kill Omni-Man and Invincible from another Mark. So basically he learned how to kill them from this version of Mark from another universe in exchange for Angstrom freeing him. But of course, he betrays this version and brings in the Donald and Cecil of this universe to take revenge on him, which is basically setting up what we're about to see in season 3 as of this recording. And man, I'm hyped, but I hate spoilers, so I'm not gonna say any more about this. Now we're at episode 3, and this is primarily based on issue 23. Mark heads off to college, and it's a way bigger deal here than it is in the comic. Like, I swear, nobody cares really. Like, people care of course, but they don't make it a big deal. And this entire sequence of him tossing away his toys,
They're collectibles.
and Debbie attending a support group is completely new. William gets it on his first day in college, and Mark does too. He did the same in the comic, but it wasn't on his first day. And here, they do this right after he tells her the truth about his secret identity, after she found out he left whenever that robot zombie came around. And there, they wasn't even close to figuring out who's behind all of that, while in the show, they caught the guy last season. But yeah, this was the first time them two got together in that way. While in the show, the first time they got together in that way was here. Then both mediums decide to give him some privacy, and then they go to the backstory of Alan. Now let me tell you, his entire backstory is straight up one-to-one in the coolest way possible. They were practically reading the panels. It was pretty cool.
Ever resourceful,
some Unopans were able to escape, abandoning their home for the stars, until Alan. He was the first and only success.
And for the most part, the whole thing is about the same as the comic. One thing they did add was more hate from the other members of the Coalition. And his girl just started off as his girl in the comic, while here she's working alongside him in the Coalition. But other than that, Alan tells the Coalition about Mark and how he's different from the rest of the Viltrumites. Afterwards, Comic Alan goes straight to his girl's house and gets convinced to get it on, because this version has these strict customs that he follows, so he's normally completely against that stuff. While Show Alan gets stopped by the main man and tells him to look for a mole in the Coalition. That's one change, because in the comic they don't do that. Alan has no idea that there's a mole. But then after that's when he goes in his girl's house and gets it on. And he's all in for it. He's not like his comic counterpart at all. Then they go back and forth between Mark and Amber and, Alan and his girl. But he can't do anything because they're both just doing things, so he just talks about a cat. And this is all new, because in the comic, the narrator just waits there right outside his room. Afterwards, they eat and Show Alan tells her about the mole. And she talks about it, but low-key, she kind of looks sus in my opinion. While in the comic, since he doesn't know, she's the one that brings up that there might be a spy, but she does it in a joking way, and in a way that doesn't arouse any kind of suspicion, you know what I mean? Then that's when the Viltrumites bust in and starts asking about more information in regards to the Viltrumites on Earth. But he's more skeptical about how he got this knowledge, because he knows there's a mole. While in the comic, he just assumed they read some kind of file with his info in it. And then he gets beaten to a pulp both times. And these Viltrumites are not the same between one another at all. Once Alan gets to the hospital, it's pretty much the same. The main man, Thaddeus, comforts the girlfriend, and he goes in to see him. Then once he walks in, Comic Thaddeus tells him that he thinks that there's a mole and he doesn't know who it is yet. While in the show, he just straight up cuts his life support. And that's when Alan's story ends for now. It then cuts to Rex confronting Kate about her cheating, and Kate tells him, "I didn't cheat because we weren't together, but I'm also with Immortal because you're immature." Shapesmith also does this. Robot asks Monster Girl out on a date while discussing his newfound feelings of fear, which he doesn't really talk about in the comic. We just know how he feels about food. That's all he really talks about for the most part. But in the show, they go more in detail about what it actually means to be a human, and I really like that. He also asks her out literally right after meeting Shapesmith, and does so in his robot form. While in the show, he does it in his human body, which props to him for that. Mark and William talks about Mark's first time with Amber, and Mark avoids the topic in both mediums. But then Seance Dog appears, and this is a major change. In the comic, he's Science Dog, a whole different breed for one, and he's more of an engineer, while the show turns him into a Doctor Strange kind of character. He first arrives at Mark's dorm, while in the comic he first arrives at his house. Here he claimed he needed help with a meteor shower, while on the other side, he vaguely just warns of a cosmic threat wiping out women and children. And to be honest, that's all Mark needs. Like, once he hears that, he's like, alright, let's go. While here, he flat out lies about the situation. And then William comes out of nowhere and convinces Mark to go. So in the show, he needed a lot more convincing than he did in the comic. In both mediums, he has to tell his loved ones where he's going before he leaves, but Comic Amber reacts differently. In the show, she's very supportive and completely understands what he's doing. While in the comic, she's upset, and it's revealed that she pretty much told her friend that she was dating a superhero. And also, Mark disobeys Cecil in both versions. Mark insists saving lives matters most and leaves for Thraxa. And then on Thraxa, Mark discovers that he was lied to in the show, but then in both versions, the alien leads them to the planet's new monarch, Nolan. And then it ends. And now this is where it starts getting good. Episode 4 is directly from issues 26 to 29, and it starts with what Nolan does after his big fight with Mark. It shows him drifting through space, saddened by what he's done. And now, without the Viltrumite way, he doesn't even know who he is anymore. So basically, he's lost purpose in life. But the one thing he did know is that he had to help this Thraxian ship from its demise. So that's what he did, and brought them back to their home planet. And he tried to leave, but they asked him to stay, and he eventually became their new leader after his display of heroism, and because he's older than everybody there. While in the comic, he chose this planet a week after fighting Mark. And as soon as he stepped foot there, he instantly knew that he wanted to stay, and was made leader solely because he was older than everyone else on the planet. It's also implied that he wanted to take control anyways as soon as he got there. After seeing him, Mark hugs Nolan in both versions, but in the show he confronts him for lying to get him here, and he also rejects Nolan. He hates him for everything he's done. While in the comic, Mark opens up, saying that he misses him and wants him to come home. Nolan refuses though because he doesn't want the Viltrumites to come back and hurt the people he cares about. But the thing with Mark is this is one of the first times he truly expresses his pain over Nolan's betrayal in the comic. In the show, Mark tries to leave, but Nolan stops him since he knows he will get lost in deep space. And then that's when he introduces his new wife and son.
You gotta be...
The Mauler twins' little storyline, you know, when one of the twins pretty much becomes King Mauler and the other is his servant, but then the clone ends up poisoning him and killing him. That way it could go back to being how the Mauler twins should be, quote unquote, is identical in both mediums. Donald's arc follows him, discovering why he's alive. And the cool thing is that he realizes he's an android alongside the audience. While in the comic, he's known he was an android for a long time. He tells a newly recovered Rick about his cybernetic enhancements after dying the first time, explaining how it numbed his emotions and led to a divorce. Then back on Thraxa, Nolan explains how the Flaxans gave him purpose and warns that the Viltrumite will kill everyone on the planet, including his son, for being genetically inferior. Comic Mark immediately agrees to help, while Show Mark is understandably hesitant. Omni-Man offers to train Mark, and just as they start, the same Viltrumites who beat Alan arrive in the show. While in the comic they're different except for this guy. Nolan tells Mark to hide his wife and son in the caves, which he does. Meanwhile, Eve crashes at the old Teen Team HQ, I believe that is. And then of course, Kill Cannon picks this day to try to rob it. So Adam Eve stops him. In the caves, Comic Mark kind of bonds with his brother, while Mark and Nolan's wife don't really talk too much. While in the show, they have a pretty good conversation and he learns why she loves Nolan. But then that's when the Viltrumite comes out of nowhere. And man, he is more brutal in the show, calling them disgusting creatures.
With these disgusting creatures.
Instead of just these creatures like in the comic. Their fight stays in the cave longer in the show, while in the comic they take it outside. And Nolan saves Mark in both mediums, but the show explicitly shows him killing the Viltrumite, while the comic does it off panel. Debbie reflects on old photos in both versions, but the show expands this a bit more when she's explaining her memories with the costume maker. I always forget his name. Anyways, the rest of the show follows the comic pretty closely. Nolan kills the remaining Viltrumites, but is gutted by the survivor who dies taking revenge. Nolan's advice to Mark also changes. He tells Comic Mark to step up, while in the show he tells him to stop holding back. And that's when they show a great scene with Mark getting the upper hand, while Comic Mark did not have that luxury at all, let me tell you. And it ends with them taking Nolan away and him saying to read his books. But the show adds more dialogue with Nolan saying to not forget all the good things he's done in his life. I really like how this show is highlighting that Mark really is holding back. That's how much he cares about people and about lives in general. While in the comic, I'm sure he cares about them the same amount, but it just doesn't talk about that. So it feels like this show is really fleshing out his character more, and I like that. But I'm gonna talk more about that in another video. It ends with them taking Nolan away, and lastly, this Viltrumite gives Mark a time frame to take over Earth, 100 years. While here, they just said that they'll come back soon, and it ends. Episode 5 looks like it's coming from issues 30 to 41. And it starts with the Thraxans, including Mark, recovering from the Viltrumites. When Omni-Man's wife tells him to leave, he refuses at first, wanting to help more. But she insists, believing Earth needs him. And low-key, she's right. While he's gone, Omnipotus wreaks havoc in both mediums. But the comic actually shows the fight, featuring heroes we'd never seen before like Bolt, and them fighting in a city instead of this desert-like area. This is also when Black Samson wakes up from his coma, with his powers fully restored, marking the first time we see them in the comic and really ever, while the show has yet to reveal them. Debbie moving on is a great change, and you know, she deserves it, especially after Mark tells back and tells her what Omni-Man does. But I'll admit, this is one change that I wish they didn't make. Them skipping Mark's emotional explanation to her was a mistake. In the comic, their conversation was very realistic, and it was filled with conflicting emotions. Stuff like that really draws you in, you know what I mean? And both versions show how Debbie is just furious with Nolan, but in the comic, she wanted him to come home as well. Until Oliver walks in and calls Mark brother. That's when she was like, huh? And she reluctantly agrees to watch Oliver while Mark runs errands. While in the show, it was her decision to take care of Oliver, so Mark didn't have to leave college. Donald confronting Cecil about being an android is new, and Cecil confronting Mark about abandoning Earth happens at his dorm in the show, but outside the Pentagon in the comic. Comic Mark is more mature here, calling Cecil out for trying to punish him despite knowing Mark was right to leave in this situation and help out the Thraxan planet. Another change is Cecil trying to take Oliver immediately, whereas in the comic, he wanted Mark and Debbie to raise him, ensure that he would turn out just like Mark. Amber's chilling with her friends, and when Mark comes back, she was a lot more understanding towards him. While here, she was alone and was pissed for him being gone so long, and even thought about breaking up again. Her friends also try and convince Amber to cheat on him in the comic. And then it gets to Donald's entire arc, you know, coming to terms with who he is and stuff like that. And that is a great change. I'm glad they made that, because the comic barely talks about him. They only talk about him in spin-off comics. Robot confronts Immortal about the overuse of Monster Girl's transformation out of fear of her aging, but she tells him to stop. And this is different because I don't think he ever did this in the comic. What I do know though is that during this time in the comic, this was when Robot hired the Mahler twins to help him finally get his body. And honestly, you're gonna see a lot of timeline changes from here on. Another notable change before we continue is that Mark sees Eve after he comes back from space, and they just kiss. But Mark rejects her afterwards for Amber and said that this was wrong of them to do. This was completely cut. Now the Mars mission is about to begin. A huge Mars ship is coming to Earth, and it's all Shapesmith's fault. In the comic, they had no idea he was from Mars, and he was sent there to replace the NASA astronaut. While in the show, he came to Earth just because he wanted some adventure. Rex's pep talk to Amber is new because they don't really talk after they break up in the comics. And Cecil came to Mark's house to ask him for help about the Mars situation instead of calling him and Eve to come over while they were talking about the kiss. Mark tells Amber that he has to leave, and she's mad, but she understands and calls her friends to hang out. While in the comic, she is crashing out, bro. And her feet is huge, by the way. She's got Eustace Bag feet. But anyways, afterwards, she instantly calls the other guy. Eve joins last minute in the show, and this is when it explains that only the characters with impenetrable skin can go to Mars here. While in the comic, Cecil devises this plan at Guardians HQ. This scene with the soldiers is a lot more funnier in the show, and she kills both of them here, while in the comic, she only kills one. And then after that, it's pretty much 1-to-1, especially whenever they get on the alien ship and their fight with the aliens. Then while that's happening, the rest of the Guardians are facing off against the Lizard League too. And they're really similar as well. But Rex is crying about the loss of both his teammates because Shrieking Ray actually did die here, like he straight up got eaten. And then the episode ends midway of these fights, with Alan waking up stronger than he was before, and the main man Thaddeus here revealing that he's also a Viltrumite. Episode 6 picks up right where they left off with the Mars mission, where Robot finally finishes the device and Mark saves the day. After they defeat the villain, the show adds Eve and Robot getting briefly taken over but quickly snapping out of it. Everything else though is 1-to-1. Mark taking out the other ships, that way they can all escape, and everyone being impressed by what Mark did. Even Immortal, in both versions, he was like, man, I hate you, but I'll admit you did a pretty good job. This is also the start of Mark and Eve's romance in the show. While in the comic, as y'all know, they kissed before they went to Mars, and Eve liked him way before that. It then cuts to Rex versus Supreme Lizard. The fight plays out very similarly, but in the comic, Rex wins with one punch, while the show emphasizes how hardcore Rex really is. The characterization of Supreme Lizard is also different too. In this, he's evil, but also he's more comical, you know, like a scaredy cat. While in the comic, he's more of your traditional evil villain that's willing to sacrifice others to get ahead, and he's pretty smart. Rex is then found by Britt, who was also in the Omnipotence fight in the comic. This guy is the government's last line of defense, and he's really strong and is known to be invulnerable, but the show just didn't introduce him yet. Maybe they're saving him for something else. But yeah, the comic shows Britt finding him, while in the show he was just founded by random guards. And lastly, Shrinking Ray survived. It then cuts to everyone in the hospital after they figured out what happened to the Guardians. And after Kate's funeral, Black Samson helps Immortal realize his feelings for Kate. while here he knows how much he loves her because by this time they're already married. Yeah, his girlfriend died here, but his wife died in the comic. But each one is still deeply saddened because they thought they had more time with her. Amber and Mark talk and it's awkward, while in the comic they break up immediately after he returns whenever Mark sees that she'd be happier with someone else. This is a change that I wish they did not make because all they did afterwards is make their breakup extremely predictable, yet they still dragged it out and sprinkled some cheesy moments along the way.
Why are you here talking to me when you should be talking to him?
Rick comes back, and this is all new. Everything they do in this episode did not happen. At least it didn't happen yet in the comic. Because whenever Rick is fully recovered in the comic, William is nowhere to be seen because he still believes he's straight at this time. Donald is also the first to greet him in the comic. And this is one of the first times we ever heard about anything in regards to Donald's life. He explains how when he got his cybernetics, he lost all of his emotions, which in turn caused a divorce with him and his wife. He explains how you should be happy to be alive and to have your emotions intact. While in the show, he trauma dumps and doesn't make Rick feel better about his situation until Rick tries to kill himself later on. Mark and Rex talk in the hospital about his relationship with Amber, but here he talks about how he just broke up with her. While in the show, it's only about how rocky their relationship is right now. They also have a much friendlier relationship in the show because Rex is starting to reflect on how bad he treated the women in his life. Cecil also never asks Adam Eve to join the Guardians. And Amber seeking Eve's advice never happens. But Mark talking to Art does. Though in the show he focuses on Amber, while in the comic, Mark talks about how he likes both Amber and Eve. He also talks about future Eve coming in and professing her love for him, a scene that has yet to happen in the show. Mark then gets Nolan's books from him in both versions and reads both Space Rider and Savage Beasts. But of course the show animates these. In the comic it was just one single picture and a long column of text. Cecil tells Immortal to take a break to grieve Kate's death, but he refuses in both versions. When they detect something entering Earth's orbit, Show Immortal immediately assumes it's Omni-Man and flies off, while in the comic, he doesn't know what he is, he just flew off. It then shows the Viltrumites bringing Omni-Man to prison, which they didn't show in the comic. The Sequid ends up being alive in both mediums, and at the end, it shows Angstrom getting his suit tailored, and he finally goes on his merry way to Mark.
Look out, Eagle! We're...
This episode is all over the place when it comes to the issues it's based off of, so I'll just list them as I go. It starts with the events from issues number 10, with Amber and Mark at Comic-Con, and they find the booth for the creator of Seance Dog. And low-key, this is my favorite scene in season 2. When he talks to the creator of his favorite comic book series, who also have a TV show. He asks how they get everything out on time. And the creator responds by telling him the ways the animators cut corners in order to produce seasons quicker. And they actually show you examples of what they do, which is pretty cool. The book does the same thing, but they talk about the corners cut in the comic space. This is so creative to me, I gotta admit. It then cuts to issue 25, where Rex fights Octobus instead of recovering. And it goes the same way in both versions, with him struggling at first, then Invincible comes in trying to help but he rejects that, and then ends up overpowering Octobus, while also clowning him on his speech. They also have the same goal, to be a better person. They just have different motivations. In the comic, his friendship with Monster Girl helped change him for the better. Because of her condition, he becomes more empathetic towards her, and his care for her pushes him to be more selfless and less egotistical. And the more he did that for her, the more he did for other people in his life. Couple that with his guilt about cheating on the best girl he's ever had, and you get someone who wants to be better. Also, his fight with Octobus happens right before Kate cheats on him with Immortal, while in the show it happens afterwards. Here he's also doing this to prove to himself that he can protect the people around him. Robot wants to cure Monster Girl. In the comic, he spends months researching a solution, while in the show, his first idea was a robot suit, which I don't think we've seen in the comic. And Immortal quitting the team because of Kate's death happens in both mediums. Principal Winslow talks to Mark about his grades in both versions. And then Donald learns he chose to have his memories erased after each death, while in the comic, he only dies once. So this never happens because he never had to make that decision in the first place. Mark talking to his mom about Amber is new, but then that's when it starts getting crazy. Mark and Amber goes to dinner and they are interrupted by Anissa. In the comic, he's having dinner with his mom during the day, and she only threatens her, while in the show, she threatens Amber and everyone else in the restaurant. Here, Anissa apologizes for her threat, while in the show, she comes off as less compassionate. She still ends up fighting the sea monster and beating Mark up, but refuses to kill him even when he won't cooperate. It's just that you can tell that Anissa likes him a little more than he does in the comic. Amber and Mark break up right after that, because in the show, she realizes that she just can't handle his world. While in the comic, of course, this never happens. They broke up way before this. And then it ends with Levi taking Mark's family hostage. Now we're finally at the season 2 finale, and this one is directly from issues 33, 34, and 45, with Nolan clearing an inspection to get executed, which is something I don't understand at all. If y'all know what this is about, let me know. Mark finally gets to the house and they're literally just reading the panels right now. That's how one-to-one it is at first. He talks about how it's Mark's fault for turning him into a freak, and he keeps torturing his family to get a rise out of him. Then once he charges in, he transports him to another dimension to wear him down. Some were talking dinosaurs, and even Marvel and DC itself. One difference though is for Spider-Man's part, they're clearly ripoffs here, while in the comic it's actually Doc Ock and Spider-Man. And it was only one page, while here they have a lot more screen time. In the comic, Mark furiously says, "You did this to yourself. You stopped your machine midway." And then Angstrom calls him a liar and keeps threatening his family. In the show though, Mark is more empathetic. He says, "You tried to save me. I don't know what happened, but I know deep down you're not a killer." But this version of Angstrom has memories of countless universes. Angstrom fundamentally believes Mark is the killer. He is the bad guy because he has all the combined memories of every other version of him in every universe. So he's seen Mark kill millions, including his own wife and kids. He can't even fathom a good Invincible anymore. While in the comic, this man's mind is made up already. He's straight up evil, and he doesn't care what he has to say. He sends Mark through more dimensions to try and wear him down. And while Mark is gone, Debbie gets under his skin in the show and tells him that he's the bad guy of this universe, which infuriates him so much that he breaks her arm with the bone out and everything, bro. And surprisingly, he didn't go that hard on her in the comic. Like, yeah, she was a little battered at first, but he didn't make her bone show when he broke her arm. And I also think Angstrom was on some other stuff with his mom too, but I can't really tell. I'm telling you though, Angstrom was extremely more evil in the comic, and this is the change that I wish they didn't make. They really tried to make us more sympathetic towards Angstrom here. But no, if you're setting this man up to be a big villain, let him be a big villain. Let him turn into that. Don't just half do it. In the show, he's just not as interesting because they're just pointing out something that we already know, that he's the bad version. What they should have done was focus a little bit more about his thought process throughout the show and then turned him into something to be reckoned with here. But that's just what I think. Let me know what y'all think down below. The rest of the fight is the same though. He kills Angstrom because he thought he was stronger in both versions. And then he tries to justify his actions, but eventually he understands that he took a man's life today and he knows what all made him do it. Then he spends some time in another dimension until the future Guardians come in and save him, and Eve declares her love. Alan finally gets to prison, and Mark visits his family in the hospital. Luckily, they're okay thanks to Cecil, but here they really emphasize that Mark isn't like Omni-Man in order to make him feel better. Robot and Monster Girl agree to go on a second date, and then it cuts to Immortal at home in the snowy mountains, and he finds out Kate has had a 0 copy the entire time and has been living throughout her copies, which doesn't happen in the comic. Because here she comes back with her 1 copy and only says that she needs help to stop her brother from doing something stupid. While here she talks about how she wants to live her life and, you know, she didn't die, stuff like that. Then in the show they show something completely new, and that's the mummy scene with this woman that's super strong because her grandma apparently. I don't really understand that too much, but they released this mummy and it turns out he actually doesn't want to inhabit a female. Then the show shows something that never happened in the comic. It cuts back to the much needed aftermath from the fight. The comic always speeds through these things while the show shows you the direct impact that these fights have. Right after this, Mark decides to quit college in order to grow stronger for what's to come in the future. While in the comic, he's still very much in college. After he takes down Levi here, this is where a lot of things start popping off, honestly. Robot gets his new body during the fight with Mark and Levi, and then him stopping D.A. Sinclair once for all, him choosing whether or not to stay in college, the Mars mission that we saw a couple episodes prior, Anissa coming around. All of this happens after the fight with Levi in the comic, which makes all those things that I was saying about setting Angstrom up to be a more interesting villain even more valid. This scene with Mark struggling to tell Eve about her future self is new, but I'll talk more about their relationship in the season 3 differences. And lastly, Nolan saying that he misses his wife happens in both mediums. They also add more dialogue about how he feels regret and sadness for the things he's done. And he doesn't even consider himself a Viltrumite anymore since they don't have these feelings or emotions towards lesser beings. And then it ends. That is every difference I could find in season 2. Y'all, let me know the changes I missed. I know I missed some. And also, what are some changes that y'all felt hurt or helped the show? Let me know in the comments below. Until then, I'll catch y'all in the next one. Peace out.